match it to one of the green
Don't worry,
stickers
it was
on
probably
the
easier than
table.
Actually, I was gonna guess.
Hold on, David. We're gonna grab this, and I need you to match it to the green stickers on the table according to who he is.
Hi guys, I'm here.
This is your person. Go around, look at the green stickers, try to match it to the person.
Okay, the king of all.
Alright, so you matched up, okay?
What?
Did you match it up? Did you get a little match the green one? Are you in the right spot?
Yes, ma'am.
Can you match the green sticky on the one, please?
You would touch another bud,
What we're going to do today is we're going to do a Harkness discussion. And we are going to discuss, as we're reviewing, getting ready for our exam, which is Thursday, we are going to discuss what were the most important events in our 6 periods. Okay, we've got 6 periods. What is the most important event in each of those periods? What event marked it so much that it literally caused change within the period, but also continuity within other periods? Okay, we're going to specifically look at periods 4, 5, and 6. And I do want to say in the process, sounds like you okay? That's your spot?
Yeah,
Did you find your yellow sticky?
see, it was Charlemagne, but I can't find it.
Okay, maybe on the back of the green, would you just write the word Charlemagne? For the Harkness discussion, what we want to make sure that we're doing is being respectful of people as they're talking. One person talking at a time. I've asked Paula and Kinsey to be our consuls for this, so they're going to keep you in order. I believe, Aria, you are helping out with periodization, is that right? And who's doing my timing? Okay, Kristen is going to do our timing. We're going to have 10 minutes for periods 4, 5, and 6 to get started. As you're looking right now down at your desk, let me just remind you of what homework's like for tonight. Tomorrow for class, we're playing a game. It's a speed dating game. Okay, have you guys heard the term speed dating before? Yeah. You kind of sit down and you talk to someone and you get a certain amount of time and you tell them all about yourself. And then you move, you rotate. Okay, so we're going to be in rows tomorrow during class, and you are going to be 2 different people. If you take a look at what I gave you today while you walked in, the yellow one is who you're going to be. That's one of your people. That will be your first one. Okay, so I'm over here to CG, and that matches this green description. Okay, so that can get him started on his bio. On the back of the green description is your second person. So we have someone there. Now the idea is you don't want to tell people who you are, because you want to win the game tomorrow and not let your neighbor win the game tomorrow. So if you want to go ahead and remove these so they can't see who you are, that would be a good idea. On the back of this, if you want to review these particular ones tonight, that would be a really good idea. You don't have to. If you just want to come and cold mirror and see how you do, to know how you're setting and getting ready for the exam, you're welcome to do that. But if you want to review these names tonight, those are the ones that the speed dating will be on. And these are all the instructions that you need. You're going to come in tomorrow with a bio. Your bio will look similar to this as it's written here. You come in and you'll say those things about your one personality, and then you'll switch and do the other personality. Okay? So that's for tomorrow. I'll give you more instructions tomorrow, but you can read this through tonight. And as of right now, you can put this away. Put your 2 stickies on that so that you don't lose them, because you have to prove to me tomorrow who you actually are. And I'm sure I can give you a new one so nobody knows that you're CG, okay? I'll choose one of those. You'll have to prove to me who you are. I'm going to write it down, and then we'll score at the end of class tomorrow to see how you guys did. Okay, so go ahead and put that away. You don't need it out. What we're going to do right now is we're going to play in a Harkness discussion. I don't want anyone using their tablets. Put this away. You are welcome to have your ISNs out if you brought them. You're welcome to have those out. Key concept pages would be a really good idea. What I'd like to do for this Harkness discussion is make sure that everyone does take time to speak. I will be grading it off of the rubric that I normally do for Harkness discussions, so we'll be doing kind of a team effort here. The idea is I'm going to give you about 5 minutes to chat with your neighbor in just a second. And with your neighbor, try to come up with, for periods 4, 5, and 6, the one most important event for each of those periods that, again, affected that particular period with change and caused continuity in future periods. For example, if we are doing period 1, what was your argument? I think that one's probably the easiest. Anybody? The Neolithic Revolution, Agricultural Revolution, okay? And how I could argue that, I want to ACE that. Remember our ACE acronym for the SAQ. I want to answer the question, say Agricultural Revolution. I want to cite evidence, and then I want to explain how that answers the question. That's how I want to do that. So in that process, I might say the Agricultural Revolution was the most important event in period 1. Because of the Agricultural Revolution, people settled down, then I'm citing the evidence, right? They settled down, and in that settlementation, they created civilizations, which eventually led to culture. And cultures then collided with each other and created things like, we get the development of society, we get development of hierarchical structure, we have patriarchy, which lasts all the way through period 6, and we see that even today, okay? What could you argue against agricultural revolution? Someone might say, well, Ms. Murphy, yes, agricultural revolution is great, but how about if we look at technologies? How about if we look at the movement from using bone and wood tools to stone and bronze tools? Without the development of that technology, could agriculture have ever even occurred? Right? And so then we can start to debate a little bit. So as we're listening to people's opinions about specific periods, make sure you take that into account and say, yes, I agree that that's true, but how about this one? And mention your particular advice. Okay, so we're doing it for period 4, 5, and 6. Any questions before I let you have about 5 minutes to chat with the neighbor? Yes?
Is the 5 minutes just for period 4?
Nope, you can do
All of
you
them?
can figure out something for 4, 5, and 6. You might want more than one idea too, because if everyone pitched your one idea, like if everyone came up with agricultural revolution together, you might want to be able to have something else that you could have something discussed too. Okay, so think a little bit outside the box. Be willing to be bold in your opinions. And yeah, you have 5 minutes. Go ahead and get started. Chat with someone next to you.
Yeah, exploration is
The first time you see Alright, ladies and gentlemen, let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to turn it over to the consuls to lead the discussion from now on. Reminder that I do want everyone to speak. I'm going to be taking notes that you are each speaking. So please make sure to do so. You want to use SAQ. Make sure you're giving evidence, not just an answer. Be respectful of other people's opinions, but do take risks. If they go for the obvious answer, take a risk and go for something a little bit less obvious. Okay? Any other questions before we begin? Everybody know what they're doing? Yes,
Do
ma'am.
you just want me to read the thing before the discussion starts?
Yes.
The acronym? Okay.
Yes, but let's have our timekeeper tell you when to go ahead and get started. Okay? Let's go.
Okay. Period 4 was germs. So it was gunpowder empires, exchange and exploration, Renaissance and Reformation, Ming, and then silver, sugar, slavery. Yeah.
Okay.
the blue razor.
Councils.
Yes.
Yeah, raise your hands.
Council. Yeah, I'll start us off.
Alright.
Okay, so in my opinion, I think the most important thing, which many of you have here, is exploration. I think so because exploration, for the first time we see Vasco da Gama getting to India and finally connecting Europe, Africa, and Asia for the first time. So we have like a global connection there. And during this time period, we also see the Columbian Exchange begin, where the America is finally connected to Europe, connected to Africa, which is also influencing Asia. And so here, that also ties into exchange, because now finally the entire world is basically, for the first time, getting to share different things with each other that they didn't have before. Like how America's got domesticated animals, and then Europe got like potatoes and other things, and then Africa got different plants.
I'd argue that not exploration, but rather the Renaissance is the most important, because without the Renaissance, we wouldn't have new technologies, being able to print or like have new maps, have new technologies that help us to discover these places, geography, learning, and better literacy in order to help us read and understand what we're actually exploring and learning about.
But I would say the most notable technologies at this time period were related to exploration, such as astrolabes, revised maps, and caravels, and even the compass that was brought in from period 3. But I would tentatively speculate that the Columbian exchange would be the most important thing in period 4 because it has the longest lasting effect on world history. An example, a proof would be the skyrocketing population that's happening right now. How did that start? It started with the Columbian exchange, the sweet potatoes that's going into China, and food stuff that is high in carbs going to Europe, and I think that really started off the demographic, global demographic change, and involving many other countries, and that kind of snowballing into things such as Green Revolution and other foodstuffs diffusing, leading to what we are right now.
While I agree with that, I would like to, my opinion, is that is actually very similar to Ian's point, that it's exploration and colonization that was the most important part of period 4, specifically of the Americas. Because you have these European nations going to the Americas and being able to take over because of the diseases they brought. They get new crops to supplement their own populations, and they get basically access to much more resources than they had previously had before. Makes them much richer, much more powerful, much more able to dominate the world as they do in later periods, which is a major continuity from period 4 all the way to period 6, is European dominance. And even if you look at something like the Industrial Revolution, the Columbian Exchange allowed all these new crops to go to the old world, which increased agricultural productivity, which pushed people to find new ways to process and produce goods efficiently, which led to the inventions such as steam engines, machines that allowed the Industrial Revolution to be so powerful.
I feel like it's not exploration because regardless of the time period that it happens, it will get explored. So it could have happened in modern and contemporary, but like, it wouldn't have affected it. But it feels like, I say it's Renaissance because it's like the individual who's thinking this, and if they pass, then like the idea won't come. And also like how during the Renaissance, like Voltaire and Rousseau and all those guys, and also for the Renaissance, how it like was time for like the printing press and how Bloomberg, right? And he like printed the Bible, and like as we say like before, like religion shapes our world. So like we can see that Reformations and Renaissance kind of go hand in hand with this, but I think that's most important.
We have under 5 minutes left in the discussion.
Could I have the console so we know what's happening, please?
Alright, we're talking about period 4, and we're essentially trying to go over the most important events that occurred in the period, and essentially talking through like what actually was like the most important. So
I would say that the most important thing would be the improvements in naval technologies, because as you talked about with like exploration, like even though exploration was important, it would not have been able to have happened if naval technologies hadn't been improved. They wouldn't have been able to cross all the way from Europe to the Americas, or from Europe all the way around Africa to India if they did not have the revised maps, the compass, the astrolabe. They did not have more advanced ships, advanced sails, and just a more advanced method to perform sailing. And if they had not had like the schools that sailors went to in order for them to improve their ways of exploration and just further the distance that they can explore.
I would say slavery is also very important in here because first, it changed the gender ratio in Africa because of so much slavery so much people being transported to the Americas, and also like it also shaped like the diversity of South America, for example, in Brazil. And it also gave I don't know, more people to work in the sugar plantations, for example, in Brazil, which was very important for the period at the time.
Yeah, I'd say that one of the most important of this period was that the Ming Dynasty chose not to take part in exploration, because if China could have been one of the greatest ocean maritime power, but they chose not to. So if had China been the greatest sea power, then Portugal might not have been the best, and then the entire history might just be different if, yeah.
Those are our councils are Quincy and Paula, just so you're aware.
I think the most important thing that happened in period 4 was the turning point, the Reformation in 1517, as a consequence of the crusade that ended in 1492, which is only 25 years after. Shows that a more globalized world, as the Reformation created Protestants, and also as also a consequence to that, the Catholics also created the Jesuits. So more Catholicism in South America and more spread of Christianity throughout the whole world. Yeah, and then as Sanjay said, the printing press was also a huge role to the Reformation, as the Bible was published for all people.
You have a little under 2 minutes now.
Does anyone want to speak as a spoken about this?
Or do you have to speak 2 times?
No, you just have to speak.
Alright.
Yeah.
Oh.
Okay. I think I'd like to take the point back to the first point we had, where we said that exploration was the most important thing that happened in this period, because although it was important that China withdrew from all type of exploration, although it was important that the Renaissance happened, and although the Columbian Exchange is also important, none of it could have happened without the exploration. The Columbian Exchange only begun because the Spanish started investing and getting interested in exploring the rest of the world, and the only reason why slavery happened was because they finally dominated Africa. And although China not participating in that exploration did shift history altogether, because it would have been less Western dominated, more dominated by China, we realized that the rest of the world at this time did not know that China was that powerful yet. They didn't know how inferior their fleet was in comparison with China. So in their minds, they were still ahead of the game. So really, exploration was what caused everything else we see in periods 5 and 6. When we look at globalization, the continual, fight between racism and slavery, and then we see the population increase, even though there was slavery, because of the Columbian Exchange.
5 seconds.
So we're now going to move into period 5. Do we have the items?
Okay. So period 5 was rising. R for raising. R is revolutions. A is abolition? Sorry. I is industrialization. S is social Darwinism and spheres of influence. I is imperialism. N is nationalism. G is global migrations, and ING is Qing dynasty. That's socialism. Yeah.
The most important concept to consider when thinking about period 5 would obviously be imperialism. Why this is the most important is because the British, French, and Dutch established massive colonies overseas, spread their language, spread their culture, and it really helped also make Europe a powerhouse at the time. And to this day, we can still see what has remained from the time of colonialism. It also transformed the global economy and led to increased globalization during this time period.
Sure.
I think one of the most important would be nationalism. Because with nationalism, the Europeans were able to find an identity and become stronger and focus on making themselves stronger and not to be conquered. And then they were able to get technologies when trying to compete with others and eventually spread to imperialism and gain more power.
So I would like to argue for industrialization, which I kind of think is the obvious choice, because without industrialization you can't have imperialism or nationalism, especially imperialism though, because of industrialization, Europeans were able to have the power to like go into Africa and completely dominate, where if they were where they were before the Industrial Revolution, then they would have been more or less on an equal playing field. Maybe a little bit higher, you could argue, but not so much so that they could have quite the same impact that they had. It also led to a bunch of like social reforms, and it completely changed the way that we manufactured goods and the economy, and yeah, but then it also completely changed culture and how workers interact with their companies, and yeah.
Like Drew, I'd like to argue for nationalism. As we can see in the acronyms for period 5, one of the main things, including nationalism, was industrialization, as Liz stated, and imperialism. But I think that imperialism was derived from nationalism, as countries were looking to spread their reign further out, and they couldn't. Well, most of the power was in Europe, as we all know, and they couldn't stretch out because the borders were all with world powers at that time. So they looked for places like Africa, like England went towards Oceania and stuff like that. And yes, industrial, industrialization was one of the main practices they stated, but I think that national
You got it.
But I think that nationalism boosted industrialization in the sense that it made countries once more powerful than the others, which made them invest more towards industrializing their own nations, which would later lead to factors in period 6 like World War I, World War II, which the weapons that came about were due to the nationalism that happened in period 5. I'm done.
I think nationalism, but I also think like nationalism as a result of like social Darwinistic thought, because like white man's burden and all of that, and social Darwinism is like an oppressive thought and like thinking system that put people under them. So with that came nationalism, because now people are feeling like this is actually our country, this is our land, why are we letting outsiders come in and dictate what happens to us, dictate where we live, where we get our money from. So I think social Darwinism was important, and then that fueled nationalism, especially in Africa.
A little over 5 minutes left.
Well, so I would argue again for the Industrial Revolution, because the Industrial Revolution just had such a wide scale in the period and also in later periods. Talking about later periods, like the entire basis of the world wars and the entirely different warfare that was brought about in the world wars due to the Industrial Revolution. They were able to have mass production of guns and weapons, which increased the scale of war, changed war tactics, brought in tanks, the use of chemical warfare as well as trenches, and just basically changed the way war was fought as a whole. And as well as in the Industrial Revolution, and also we have consequences now in that the greenhouse gases in our atmosphere, due to the large amounts of fossil fuels that were being burnt in the Industrial Revolution and have kept being burnt even until now. And even speaking of imperialism and colonialism, the Industrial Revolution brought about fast means in which they could produce these things from cotton or grain or agriculture that led them to want to expand, because since they could produce things faster, they would need more things to produce in order to maximize their profits. So due to that, they needed to go and find new places with abundant natural resources, causing the need for imperialism and colonialism and the problems that have come with that that we have now.
I also think the Industrial Revolution, because as many have said, it helped empires become really powerful. Also an example of this is in Japan with the Meiji Restoration. Before Matthew Perry came, they were closed and off. But after he came and opened it up, they
began the Meiji Restoration and industrialization, and they became a world power. And this seen with the Russo-Japanese War, the Sino-Japanese War, and because they were able to industrialize, they became a world power.
Another point for industrialization is that industrialization brought a lot of capitalism to a lot of different places, and out of capitalism came different and alternative views, such as Marxism or communism. And communism it went all the way to period 6 and is continuing today, and it's a big part of the world's viewpoint. A lot of China's communism and the USSR and yeah.
I believe that nationalism was a key factor in this period, but also revolutions would come out of nationalism because, for example in America, the feeling of great pride for your, wanting to be free and having your own country led people to fight for something which they wanted for a whole nation, which is today is the greatest nation that we have so far. The Haitian Revolution, where all the different nations in South America and all of the people, because they believed that they could be free from imperial rule. It's a nationalistic feel that everyone wanted to be free as a group of people who are similar to themselves. People who speak the same language, people who think the same way. They wanted to be free for once, and that inspired revolutions to go on to.
We have 2 minutes left.
Who hasn't spoken at all except for Cindy?
I believe that enlightenment is also one of the key things along with industrialization, nationalism, and other things, because it really brought up this new idea and concept, even between religions and the people, and the people were able to question how religions affected society, and also people like John Locke or who created a declaration of independence, or the French Declaration of Rights of Man. Those forms, and it led to what we are now today, and it adjusted the social equality and the social issues today.
Alright, so real quick, I think I'm just going to throw my 2 cents in, and I feel like this has been said to some extent, but when we're looking at the most important part of any period, we need to look at the source of everything, the source of what sprouted out of this period. And if we look at industrialization, we wouldn't have imperialism without industrialization because that allowed countries to expand. Industrialization gave countries power, which fostered a sense of nationalism, which was also increased by their imperialism abroad. Global migrations came about because of industrialization. Social Darwinism came about because industrialized nations felt that they're superior to all other nations. And as a result of this far swing towards social Darwinism, we then have the reactionary movement of abolition. And also, if we hadn't had imperialism and colonization abroad, there wouldn't be countries like Haiti or America, which would have revolutions, and then as a result, a domino effect also caused a revolution in France. So I think we have to look at industrialization as the source of all that happened in this period.
Is time up, or do we still have?
It's 5 seconds.
Sorry.
So we'll now move into period 6. Academic, please.
Let me remind you, you all need to speak twice. This is our last 10-minute session, so please do make sure to speak up. Thank you.
So you do speak, keep it short so other people can also speak, but don't lessen value what you're saying, but
Awesome.
The acronym is DICE. D is for decolonization, I is for innovations and integration. Oh my gosh, I can't.
Integration.
This is a disease. We're skipping that one. You get it. Forget about C. Yeah, it's a disease. C is conflicts and communism. E is environmental issues and economic integration. Oh my God.
Integration.
Okay, that was an integration.
So I believe that the ultimate spout of all the events in this period is actually the alliance system of the European powers before World War I. Because if there hadn't been that alliance system between the Allies and with Allies and Central Powers, War I would have just been a conflict between Austria-Hungary and Serbia, and maybe Russia. and it wouldn't have taken on the global effect, due to the colonies. And if World War I didn't happen, there'd be no Treaty of Versailles, so there'd be no World War II, so there'd be no Cold War, there'd be no decolonization because it was the world wars that affected people's ideas about their colonial rulers. And basically, the entire history of this period would have just gone a different path if the alliance system had even been a little different.
Alright.
Make sure we keep it less than a minute, because everyone can get through.
Yeah, I'm just gonna go a little later and past the lines. Just say the World War I, World War II were the biggest impact because they affected the entire globe. They had huge conflicts, there were atrocities that happened all around the world, and because of that, it opened people's eyes, and they wanted change. So the culture changed, a lot of politics changed, which also led to Cold War, and there's also the consumerism and globalization.
Christian?
I would say probably environmental things, pretty much the Green Revolution, Green Belt thing was probably the most important because it was truly a worldwide phenomenon compared to world wars, which were pretty big, but they only influenced certain parts of the world, whereas the Green Revolution influenced many third world countries and continues to affect even up until this point today.
Sorry.
I think confrontation between communism and capitalism is also kind of very important in period 6 after the Second World War. For example, like the Cuban Missile Crisis, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, although it didn't take place in Russian or American soil, but shows the continuation of tension in the whole world of these two big ideologies fighting over.
David? I believe that innovations that occurred during periods marking the most important aspects of this period. For example, vaccines and better medicine that led to the population spreading from around 1 billion to 7 billion today, or 7.5 billion today, and also the fact that it's brought about new weapons and the internet, new modes of transportation, and our world is more interconnected and developed today than ever.
I think the reason that these conflicts are having such as the Cuban Missile Crisis and also the World War was because of the innovations that came, such as tanks and airplanes and the atom bomb that was able to either start or what do you call it? Make it zone.
I'd say one of the most important of this period is technological innovations, because these innovations, the atomic bomb was invented, and if that hadn't been invented, then the Cold War might not have happened. Also later on, Wi-Fi, tablets, and all these new inventions transformed communication, transportation, and also because of these Wi-Fi and tablets, we can be here in Africa and learn about people history.
Building off of Story's argument, I think ideologies and a bunch of isms are what really built period 6. Starting with just post-World Wars, with the Cold Wars, that was the war of ideologies in reality, not just war between two superpowers and fight for influence.
Abby?
I also think it was World Wars, World War I. I feel like it was a domino effect almost. We had World War I and World War II, and then the Cold War, which then also led to decolonization, like in India with Gandhi who wanted independence, and even in Africa, many the countries wanted independence as well.
I think it's economic integration and innovations because first, in this period, a lot of organizations and corporations were created, and it connected the world. You can eat McDonald's in China or in Brazil, for example. And so, I just feel like this period was a period where we all got connected through organizations that helped and just gave the world our characteristic internet and these things.
Real quick, who hasn't spoken to us?
Me. Just in the world, we're under 5 minutes right now.
Hazel. So I would also like to argue innovation, because going back to what Abby said, she argued the world wars, and if it wasn't for the fact that these were total wars because of the innovations like tanks, airplanes, and atomic bombs, they wouldn't be as big of conflicts as they were. And they were because of the innovations that were made during this period.
Well, as the next subject state that technological innovation, technological inventions. Yeah, but I'd like to narrow it down. I think that it was more electricity that was the standing out factor in period 6, as we can see that we use it every day in our day-to-day lives. We're using everything, whether good or bad.
I'm, for the sake of conversation, I'm gonna choose something completely different, which is, I would say that our media was the most important thing that happened in period 6. Because although the Great War was very important, nothing can outweigh the impact that our media has had in our world now. When you look at the war in Vietnam, I think Americans for the first time were really showing a lot of resentment towards their government because there was live streams of the war that was happening. You could actually see people dying. You could see news in everybody's living room. And the same thing is still going on now, where you can see genocides that are happening in Myanmar from your living room and Syria from your living room. So the fact that media has been so strong shows that when one thing happens in one country or one place, it's no longer an isolated event. It sends shockwaves across our world, and we saw that with the Vietnam War when the man burned himself. I forgot what that was called. When the man burned himself, and that not only caused more nationalism in Vietnam, but caused more resentment in America, which is something that you haven't really seen before.
I feel like going back to World War I, it enabled us to come up with the innovations that we did. Because of these wars, we were coming up with new ways to kill people, new things, which led to the period of disillusionment, which is where we got a lot of our social ideas from, like psychoanalysis and these things. And then, of course, World War I leading straight into World War II, which led into the Cold War, which really defined this period, the wars. And without them, we wouldn't have the reasons for media like Ari was talking about. If there wasn't these conflicts, then we wouldn't have any reason to be learning about the world, as well as the economic integrations, which were caused by the now global effect of everything that happens, which is so impacted by economics and in turn impacts.
I think globalization is a big thing because these days, everyone's economy is dependent on the one economy. So if one falls, it's a domino effect, like she said, of all the economies working together. And through that, we have things like Americanization, where you can see like Coca-Cola in places you wouldn't think Coca-Cola would be in. So yeah, keep it short.
Good question. You have a minute and a half left. You spoke more.
I think the social changes that happened during the period 6 were caused by the innovations, including birth control, which is really important because or else, like today, even the women's rights movement in period 6 wouldn't have happened otherwise. And yeah.
Alright, so just to kind of wrap this up, I think I have to throw my vote behind innovations because when we look at the climate in Europe before World War I, we see countries going through an arms race, and this helped develop the tensions. The arms race, which was not necessarily defined by ideologies, considering that Germany and France and Britain were relatively similar in their ideology as far as political alignment. And then once we have these innovational developments, we see World War I, we see it again in World War II, we see the development of mass media, which start to affect the world and bring wars into your living room. And also these innovations, especially media, helps the propagation of these ideologies such as communism, capitalism, democracy, etc., which gives a larger understanding in the global community. And not only that, but it allowed for the spread of discontentment, for example, in Africa, which led to decolonization, or the spread of discontentment in India, which led to decolonization.
All right, well done, guys. Can we have your attention real quick while we wrap up? Hopefully, this conversation and you guys being able to just dive into the brilliance of your mind is very encouraging as we're moving forward to this exam later this week. You guys have this content. Please don't pack up right now, just wait for a sec. You have this content, it is in there. Okay? Be confident walking into that exam. We've got a few more fun activities this week in way of review. Tomorrow we're doing that speed dating game, as I mentioned. By the way, whoever has Vladimir, don't tell me who you are, but whoever has Vladimir, you matched yourself up incorrectly with your definition. So just realize that. I realized it when I gave Sori his. So just recognize that and make sure that you are finding the right information for Vladimir. But moving on, for speed dating tomorrow, you're going to go over and we're going to quiz ourselves on some of the key people during world history. And then this conversation that we just talked about with these top things for each of the periods, that's what we'll be doing for the chalk review on Wednesday. Some of you guys won't be here because that Wednesday is when you're taking your English mock. So a lot of you won't be here, but for those of you who will be here, we're going to be going outside and we're going to do a massive, please don't tap my right now. We're going to do a massive chalk timeline outside and we're going to go off of the top 15 of each of the periods, okay? So it'll be really fun. I'm available at any period today. If you need me to review any of the essays you've been working on, I'm happy to do that. Yeah, have a great day, guys. Have a nice chat.
I said,